There are many, many different worlds, much better off than our own, although most of them are odd at the same time. Jamie, one of the 6 dreamers being held in the facility run by Dr. Martin Phillips, was discovered after dreaming of such a world. As a child, she viewed a world in which human beings averaged at 3 feet tall and were twice as hairy, resembling their ancestors more than modern-day Homo sapiens. However, their brains were far more developed, which led to a highly advanced civilization. Racism, sexism, and all forms of hate were non-existent due to greater intelligence, as these human beings didn't have the time to worry about such things. They built cities unlike anything seen on any other Earth, with technology that couldn't be understood by all scientists from our world. Jamie's counterpart was also a dreamer, as psychics exist on all planes of existence, and they are usually the same people. These strings connect the multiverse in ways that even dreamers could never understand. Jamie told no one but her school counselor of her dreams, who happened to be connected to Dr. Phillips, and immediately sent word of her existence. Unfortunately, Evan was dispatched to collect her, and he did so with relative ease, like with Catalina and Joshua. Jamie was only 6 years old when she witnessed this Earth, and like the others she now lives in captivity with, she suffered for it. She is now in her early 20s, having missed all of her teenage years, instead dreaming about different worlds and having the data recorded and viewed by monstrous men. Dr. Phillips found her dreams interesting, but often she bored him, so he usually watched hers on his downtime or at meals. But tonight was much, much different. The others were asleep in their cells, but their minds were silent, void of any images of other Earths. However, Jamie's brain was stirring with psychic activity. It was currently 3 in the morning, and Dr. Martin Phillips was in his office, viewing what the girl was experiencing. After his 4th cup of coffee, the old man had tuned into her dream, his eyes glued to the screens. The Earth she was bearing witness to was one unlike the others she had seen before. The landscape was vastly different, as the supercontinent, Pangea, had never broken apart nearly 200 million years ago. Instead, it had endured, and life had prospered much faster because of this. Mankind was one race due to differing evolutions, leaving human beings to share a tan color, as if they were a mix of all races that would have been. Tribes later became nations that had set aside their small differences many thousands of years before the modern day. Peace had reigned supreme for so long, but that did not mean there weren't threats to humanity's survival. Overpopulation and lack of food and resources was a growing problem that wasn't going to stop. With a population of 62 billion, and millions dying of starvation or illness every week, world leaders were desperately searching for options to expand human territory. Scientists were looking to the sea as well as the stars, hopeful that perhaps the moon could rehome a significant portion of mankind. But nothing was promising yet. There were no leads or solutions on the horizon, but people were still dying at alarming rates. For the first time in a long time, peace was threatening to crumble, and man's inherent nature was threatening to take control. Riots were looming, and civil unrest among the wealthy and those in poverty was inevitable. Jamie and her family were considered middle class, a portion of the population that almost seemed like a myth. On this Earth, Jamie's brunette hair was the same, only it was extremely short. The world was a much warmer place, and many women didn't wear long hair, as beauty was a different art here. Jamie grew up never knowing her birth parents, as they had given her up so that she could live a better life. They were among the first wave of deaths due to rampant starvation only decades before. Ryan and Mary, 2 married psychics who chose to keep to themselves, adopted the child and raised her as their own. Ryan's ability was telekinesis, and Mary was a dreamer, much like Jamie. The girl had never thought about her actual parents or ever desired to meet them, as she was happy with the family she'd been given. Ryan and Mary had been more than supporting of her, and encouraged that she follow her heart and fulfill her dreams of entering the Olympics. Currently, Jamie was on her nightly run from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. She would cover the entire small city of Hagen, often beating her best time from the week previous. Tonight it seemed she was going to do it again, and Jamie's confidence couldn't have been any higher. Despite the falling world she was growing up in, she had optimism that nobody else shared. She was only a few blocks from home when she felt a disturbance in the road ahead. Any and all nearby rocks and pebbles began to hover a few inches from the ground, and the grass was torn by a wind that seemed to come from nowhere, yet everywhere at once. Jamie stopped about 30 feet from the center of this madness and simply watched in disbelief. Because she was a dreamer, Jamie could feel such disturbances in reality in the rarity that they occurred. There was a flash of lightning that struck the road, and flames momentarily lit up the area. When they receded, all phenomenon ceased, and where the lightning had connected with the pavement was a man on his knees, trying to catch his breath. He was panting, and his eyes were wide with either fear or confusion, perhaps even both. His brown hair and leather jacket were smoking from the heat of his arrival, and as he gazed upwards, his shocked eyes locked with Jamie's, who was also terrified. The two stared at one another for several moments as the man tried to get up but couldn't. He fell back to one knee and gasped as his lungs adjusted to the air of the supercontinent. Jamie began to step towards him when his head shot up, and he looked to her again. "Where am I?" he asked softly but with determination. He glanced at the world around him, and his confusion only multiplied. "You're in Hagen," Jamie answered slowly, trying to figure out where he had come from. "It's the capital city of Numera, one of the great nations of Pangea." "Pangea?" The man quickly repeated the name, and his face seemed horrified before asking, "Does anyone here have a connection to a man named Martin Phillips?" Jamie frowned as she recognized the name almost immediately. She hesitated on answering his question, but decided there was no harm in it, and it could help her figure out who this man was. "Not anymore," she said. "He's dead." The man's eyes filled with terror and disbelief as he processed this information, and then he asked, "What happened to him?" "He was murdered for being a psychic enthusiast and hiding them from those who wish to use them for personal gain." Tears, although slow, began to run down the man's face as he clenched his fists. "Do you know who killed him?" Jamie shook her head. "Nobody knows for sure. Some say it was those who wish to use psychics for selfish causes, but most believe it was the government. They want to use dreamers as a means of finding a new home for mankind on other worlds." "Oh no," the man murmured, bowing his head and wiping the tears from his eyes, and then he whispered, "It's already begun here." Jamie took a step forward and she asked, "Excuse me, but who are you exactly?" Without looking back up, the man answered, "My name is Jonathan Phillips, inventor, engineer, and most recently, a traveler." "So you are not from this world?" Jamie said with a nod, and her eyes narrowed. "But how did you come here?" Before Jonathan could satisfy her question, another figure stepped out from the darkness of a nearby alley. They were wearing a black suit and tie and had long, red hair that stretched past their shoulders. It was a rather tall man, at least 6 feet, 6 inches in stature. His expression was cold to say the least, and Jamie could feel the aggressive intent pouring from him. "I found you," their new guest stated, and Jonathan raised his head and rolled his eyes before groaning. "Damn it," he cursed. "You people just never stop, do you?" "There is no reason to stop," the long-haired man replied as he began to make his way towards Jonathan, who quickly stood up. "How many of you do I have to kill before you do?" he asked the approaching man, who only ignored him. The two immediately engaged in hand-to-hand combat, with each of them showing remarkable skill and precision. Jamie was dumbfounded, as she had simply been on her nightly run only 10 minutes previous. Now she was bearing witness to what appeared to be a death match. As Jonathan threw the other man into the ground and he went rolling, Jamie noticed a specific tattoo on the back of the attacker's neck. As the suited man got up, she saw it again and was for sure about what she had seen. An infinity symbol, definely tattooed in black ink just below the hairline. The man swiftly got up and punched Jonathan hard enough to draw blood from his mouth. The traveler fell to the ground and barely caught himself before being kicked in the ribs, forcing him to fall on his face. "No!" Jamie shouted as she ran towards the pair. She wasn't sure what she could do to help, but she had to try. That was just who she was, and always had been. The moment she reached them, the horrifying man backhanded her across the face, which sent her to the ground. He growled as he looked upon her. "I'll get to you next," he told her. "Just wait your turn." "Help!" Jamie screamed for her life, desperate for anyone to come and help them. The man rolled his eyes and kicked Jonathan a few more times, and even kicked his head into the pavement before turning back to Jamie. "Fine," he snarled. "If you want to go first that badly, I will accommodate you." As he stretched his hands out to grab her, he froze in place. His fingertips shook, and he could barely move his eyes as he glanced up to see another figure in the dark. This new arrival stepped out into the streetlight and waved his head to the left, throwing the suited man into a nearby bench at the bus stop. "Jamie!" The telepath said her name and quickly rushed to her side. He had short brown hair, blue eyes, and was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. "Dad!" she whimpered, looking up at Ryan Seymour with relief. "I'm here," he assured her. Jamie's eyes widened as she looked over his shoulder. The man had gotten up, stretched himself, and was approaching Ryan with deadly intent. Jamie's adoptive father anticipated this and stood back up. He glanced over his shoulder, and with a flutter of his eyes, the man was thrown on his face hard enough to knock him unconscious. Before anything else could be done, Jonathan quickly ran over to the man and produced a small knife. In an instant, he dragged the blade across the man's throat, killing him. The traveler looked up at the pair of psychics, and then took off running into the night, desperate to make sense of the multiverse he was drowning in. Dr. Phillips was still in his office, his mouth agape and his hands shaking on the surface of his desk. The old man gulped as he stared into the screen at the image of his father. Everything that he had been doing since arriving on this earth had been to find his father, a man that he honestly thought he would never see again. Jonathan appeared to be slightly older, but in comparison, he was decades younger than the son that he had left behind. The jacket he was wearing was in fact the same one he had worn the day when their Earth was destroyed, but his age didn't make any sense. How had he not aged more than a few years when it had been well over 50? What ultimately troubled the doctor were two things: the fact that he had been murdered on this Earth for doing the exact opposite of what he was doing here. The other was that his father was desperately searching for him. Is that how he had spent this entire time? Was he looking for his son just as hard as his son was looking for him? Dr. Phillips' brain was racked with questions that he could not answer. Hell, he had no idea of where to even search for the answers. The doctor pulled out his cell phone and quickly dialed Evan's number. It rang twice before his student answered. "Evan," Dr. Phillips quickly said his name. The younger man seemed put off by the doctor's eagerness. "Yes, doctor?" "There has been a development," Dr. Phillips replied. "How are you doing with your observations of Autumn Walker?" Evan rolled his eyes and groaned. "Just observing, doctor, like you told me to. This therapist is rather boring, if I must be honest." "Well, you may take a break from this mission to pursue another," the doctor revealed to him, and Evan lit up with excitement. "Anything!" Evan answered eagerly, and Dr. Phillips continued. "I want you to do some research, Evan. However you must do it. I want you to find out anything you can about an infinity symbol tattooed on the back of one's neck. Specifically that symbol, and on the neck. Immediately." Evan frowned on the other line before asking, "Can you tell me why? What is this about?" "Not now," Dr. Phillips said to Evan's dismay. "Report to me when you have developments of your own." Dr. Phillips immediately hung up the phone, and Evan snarled as he stared at his phone's screen. Sooner or later, the doctor would be answering to him. Evan promised himself such a future. The old man leaned back in his chair and took one last look at the screen before him. Dr. Phillips was in utter disbelief over Jamie's dream and planned to interview her the following day to uncover anything else that he could learn from her. "Father," he said with a grim look before he choked and then gagged. He pushed himself away from his desk and the monitors so that he could vomit on the floor at his feet. He was done for the night. The research, for the first time in over 30 years, could wait until morning.